Chapter 3617, Chapter 691, Ancient Human. Chapter 3617, Chapter 691, Ancient Human. Chapter 691. Ancient Human. Fiery Heart's complexion turned pale when she heard Ji Luorong's words. Anxiously, she asked, "Is my guild leader all right, Commander Ji?" The Flower of Seven Sins was a transcendental assassin organization specializing in killing players for money in God's domain. Apart from the Flower of Seven Sins internally nurtured experts, other experts could also take on commissions from the Flower of Seven Sins to earn money and resources. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that 99% of assassinations in God's domain were related to the Flower of Seven Sins, and even the 5 great superguilds had suffered at the hands of the organization. Now that the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was butting heads with the Flower of Seven Sins, it would absolutely spell disaster for the pavilion. If the guild leader got killed by the Flower of Seven Sins, not only would she lose some of her top-tier equipment, but the Phoenix Pavilion might also start to have difficulty keeping the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion under check. "They haven't started to fight yet, last I saw them," Ji Luorong said. Then, in a slightly disappointed tone, she continued, "If not for that team dungeon that has recently popped up, I really would have wanted to trade a few blows with that guild leader of yours. The Sin of Wrath's newly promoted commander should also make for a good opponent." Whether it was Phoenix Rain, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's current guild leader, or Bloodsand, the newly promoted commander of the Flower of Seven Sins Sin of Wrath, both were legendary individuals in God's domain and rumored to be as strong as the 10 Saints. So, they were the perfect sparring partners for Ji Luorong now that she had finally advanced to Tier 6. Meanwhile, Fiery Heart sighed in relief when she heard Ji Luorong's answer. If a fight were to break out between the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and the Flower of Seven Sins in the ruined temple, it would most likely be a life-or-death situation. But there should still be room for reconciliation if a fight hadn't started between the two. "Can you bring me there to take a look, Commander Ji?" Shifeng asked. Shifeng's words surprised Ji Luorong. With a hint of confusion in her eyes, she asked, "There's a good chance a fight will break out. Are you sure you want to go?" The conflict between the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's team and the Flower of Seven Sins team wasn't just a simple clash between 2 player teams. Instead, it was a clash between 2 powers. If a third party dared to get close to the battlefield, the 2 parties would immediately deem them as an enemy trying to take advantage of the situation, and both of them would prioritize eliminating this third party above all else. This was also why Ji Luorong had chosen not to involve herself in the conflict and came out to meet Shifeng instead. Naturally, Ji Luorong did not think that an expert of Shifeng's caliber would be ignorant of such matters. "I'm sure." Shifeng nodded affirmatively. His goal in returning to his home god's domain was to gather Zero Wing's new recruits. Now that he knew some of Zero Wing's members were in the ruined temple's library area and were about to come to blows with the Flower of Seven Sins, he naturally had to go and take a look at the situation. "Are you going as well, big brother?" Fiery Heart's complexion brightened when she heard Shifeng's intentions. Assuming that the 2 sides had yet to start fighting, if the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion were to gain an SSS rank expert in such a situation, the Flower of Seven Sins would definitely reconsider taking action. "Of course. It's not that often I get to watch such a huge fight," Shifeng said, chuckling as he looked at Fiery Heart's expectant look. "All right, then. If you want to take a look, I will accompany you," Ji Luorong said, accepting Shifeng's request without hesitation. At the same time, a look of interest appeared on her face. Anyone looking to poke their noses into a clash between 2 powers must pay for their actions. If Ji Luorong was by herself, she definitely wouldn't try to involve herself with the affairs of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and the Flower of Seven Sins. After all, even if she had successfully gotten promoted to Tier 6, she still wasn't confident in going up against all the apex experts of the 2 powers. But it was a different story if she had Shifeng by her side. Shifeng was an SSS rank expert highly praised by even Crimson Mist. Ji Luorong wouldn't mind sinking her feet into these muddy waters with such an expert by her side. Subsequently, Ji Luorong led Shifeng and the others into the ruined temple. The inside of the ruined temple was many times bigger than it looked from the outside. As soon as players stepped through the temple's entrance, it would be as if they had just entered a miniature world. Meanwhile, The inside of the temple was split into 4 primary areas: the chapel area, the graveyard area, the library area, and the living area. The chapel area was the safest of the 4 areas as it was only a level 190 to level 200 map. All team dungeons that randomly appeared in it were also at level 200 and below. It was a considerably safe area, even for Tier 5 players. The graveyard and library areas were level 200 plus maps. They were much more dangerous than the chapel area, and even Tier 6 players had a considerable chance of dying. They were also the main activity areas for the main forces of first-rate powers and above. The living area was the most dangerous of the 4 areas. It was a level 225 plus map, and Tier 6 players would have an extremely high chance of dying in it if they were below level 220. Meanwhile, under Ji Luorong's lead, Shi Feng and the others quickly traveled across the ruined temple. Then, after advancing for about 2 hours, they arrived at an ancient-looking library that measured 300 meters in height. Currently, standing in front of the library's entrance was a 3-meter-tall man. The giant of a man wore a white holy robe and carried a great sword that was as long as he was tall on his back. Although the man was only standing still with his eyes closed and his arms crossed in front of his chest, he exuded an aura rivaling primordial beasts. Minos, hero, ancient human, Tier 6, level 205 HP. Behind Minos was a pitch-black portal that served as a team dungeon's teleportation gate. At this time, though, a magic barrier covering a 500-yard radius was erected around Minos. It was obvious that players must complete some kind of test before they could enter the team dungeon. Apart from the team dungeon, Shi Feng and the others also saw a heated battle taking place outside the barrier. The battle was between 2 teams of players. One team consisted of less than 100 members, and 2 different guild emblems could be spotted in this team. The other team had more than 200 members, but none wore a guild emblem. In addition, all of these players' names were bright red, with a few even being colored black. They also exuded bloodlust visible to the naked eye, something that couldn't be seen on the average red player. We were still too late. Fiery Heart's complexion turned ugly when she saw that the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and the Flower of 7 Sins had started fighting already. Currently, a level 212, Tier 6 female elementalist from the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion could be seen fighting against a level 211, Tier 6 male berserker and a level 210, Tier 6 male assassin. Although the female elementalist vaguely held the upper hand in their fight, the same could not be said for the 2 other Tier 6 experts on the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's side. Of these 2 other Tier 6 experts, both wore a 6-winged guild emblem. Among them, one was a level 211, Tier 6 female assassin, and her opponents were 3 level 210, Tier 6 black players. Although the female assassin did her best to defend herself, her HP steadily fell over time. As for the other, she was a level 210, Tier 6 female elementalist, and her opponents were 2 Tier 6 black players. Although she wasn't losing much of her HP, she could barely hold her ground against her opponents. At a glance, it was obvious that the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was at a disadvantage. As expected of the Demon Queen. She's actually holding her ground against Bloodsand and his Vice Commander Hyena, Ji Luorong said in a tone of admiration as she watched Phoenix Rain manipulate a sea of flames against her 2 opponents. While Bloodsand might have been promoted into the Sin of Wrath's commander only recently, nobody in God's domain would dare to underestimate him. This was because he had successfully assassinated an old monster from mythology, one of the 5 great super guilds. Yet, despite simultaneously going up against Bloodsand and his Vice Commander Hyena, Phoenix Rain did not show the slightest hint of weakness. Phoenix Rain's strength far exceeded Ji Luorong's understanding of her. While Ji Luorong, Shi Feng, and the others were observing the clash between the 2 powers, the 2 powers experts also noticed their arrival. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3618, Chapter 692, Zero Wings Guild Leader. Chapter 3618, Chapter 692, Zero Wings Guild Leader. Chapter 692, Zero Wings Guild Leader. As soon as the members of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and the Flower of 7 Sins noticed Shi Feng's group, as if they had premeditated it, they promptly ceased fighting and separated into 2 groups. Why is that madwoman back? Phoenix Rain frowned as she looked at Ji Luorong. Ji Luorong was famous for being a battle maniac in God's domain. Even when she was still at Tier 5, she had participated in many wars involving the various superpowers, and the Tier 6 experts she had killed to date numbered as many as 8. Now that Ji Luorong had successfully advanced to Tier 6, even Phoenix Rain dared not underestimate her. If Ji Luorong was looking to get herself involved in the battle between the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and the Flower of Seven Sins, she could absolutely affect the entire state of the battle. Her participation might even lead to one side suffering a tragic defeat. Ji Luorong. What is the meaning of this? Are you thinking of starting a war with us? Blood Sand coldly looked at Ji Luorong. Has eternal glory been prospering so much lately that you want it erased from God's domain? Admittedly, the Eternal Glory Adventurer team had grown much stronger now that Ji Luorong and Crimson Mist had successfully advanced to Tier 6. The current Eternal Glory was so strong that even superpowers like the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion would need to be wary of it. However, it was a different story for the Flower of Seven Sins. The Flower of Seven Sins was a transcendental power in God's domain, and it stood on a completely different level than the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. In the eyes of the Flower of Seven Sins, even the 5 great superguilds were not worthy of its fear. It should be known that the 5 great superguilds were publicly acknowledged as the 5 strongest guilds in God's domain, and each of them had existed for more than a century. The foundations they had built up for themselves far exceeded any other guild. So, if the Flower of Seven Sins didn't even fear the 5 great superguilds, even less needed to be said about the Eternal Glory Adventurer team. Don't get so riled up. I'm not here to pick a fight, Ji Luorong said and smiled in response to Bloodsand's questioning. I only brought someone here to take a look. Take a look. Bloodsand grew even more agitated after hearing Ji Luorong's answer. Coldly, he said, who's the bastard with the death wish? Hearing Bloodsand's words, Fiery Heart, who stood next to Shifeng, couldn't help but grow worried. The Flower of Seven Sins had always operated fearlessly in God's domain, and any individual or power who dared to provoke the organization would never have a good end. This time, Bloodsand and his team were targeting the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's team because of a personal grudge between Phoenix Rain and a big shot from the Flower of Seven Sins. It wasn't actually the Flower of Seven Sins' grudge. However, it would be a completely different story if someone tried to spectate the Flower of Seven Sins' activities. Anyone who did so would be offending the entire Flower of Seven Sins. The last superpower that had provoked the Flower of Seven Sins had long been erased from God's domain. This was also why Bloodsand dared to threaten to eliminate the Eternal Glory Adventurer team. If even superpowers were not safe from the Flower of Seven Sins, it goes without saying the organization could easily eliminate any individual player who had provoked it. In fact, if the Flower of Seven Sins was serious, it could permanently erase even existences as strong as the 10 Saints. Meanwhile, when Phoenix Rain heard Ji Luorong's answer, she couldn't help but look at Ji Luorong in surprise. Could it be an old monster from one of the 5 great super guilds? Phoenix Rain instinctively deemed that whoever had come to spectate must be someone from the 5 great super guilds. Moreover, it should be someone of great status, such as the 5 great super guilds' old monsters. After all, only individuals with such strength and status would dare to provoke the Flower of Seven Sins. However, even after looking through Ji Luorong's group several times, Phoenix Rain failed to find anyone who could be this old monster. Aside from Shifeng, who was a level 178, Tier 6 swordsman, everyone else in Ji Luorong's group was a member of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Before Phoenix Rain could come to further conclusions, Shifeng calmly looked at Bloodsand and said, "So what if I'm here to watch your fight? What do you take the Flower of Seven Sins as? An apex power?" Following Shifeng's words, silence briefly enveloped the entire battlefield. Who is he? Is this guy crazy? Whether it was the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's members or Ji Luorong, they all looked at Shifeng in shock. This was already beyond having a death wish. Not even the 5 great super guilds' guild leaders would dare say such words to the Flower of Seven Sins. Good. Very good. Glaring at Shifeng, Bloodsand coldly said, "Although I don't know who you are, since you dare to poke your nose into the Flower of Seven Sins' business, It doesn't matter even if you have the 5 great super guilds backing you. Nobody can save you today. As soon as Bloodsand finished speaking, Hyena and the 5 black players from the Flower of 7 Sins suddenly charged at Shifeng at lightning speeds. Their actions were so fast and sudden that even Phoenix Rain and Ji Luorong failed to react to them immediately. However, just as Hyena and the 5 black players were about to reach Shifeng, 2 figures suddenly intercepted them. Shadow Flower, Purple Eye, what are you two trying to do? Hyena glared at the 2 women before him in anger and confusion. Does Zero Wing intend to protect that person? Now that a third party had appeared, the personal grudge between the Flower of 7 Sins and the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion should logically be set aside temporarily. Yet, Shadow Flower and Purple Eye had intercepted their group, essentially declaring that they wished to make an enemy out of the entire Flower of 7 Sins. Such behavior was incredibly confusing. Shadow Flower, Purple Eye, have you two lost your minds? Phoenix Rain was similarly surprised by the 2 women's actions. She couldn't understand why they would try to protect that swordsman. Although it is not our wish to do so, he is our guild leader. Shadow Flower, the former guild leader of the 100 Flower Palace, said with a wry smile as she looked at Phoenix Rain. TL Notes: 1. Shadow Flower and Purple Eye. Shadow Flower, 100 Flower Palace's guild leader Purple Eye, an expert from the Star Alliance Galaxy Past's assistant. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3619, Chapter 693, 10 Saints. Chapter 3619, Chapter 693, 10 Saints. Chapter 693, 10 Saints. Your guild leader? Phoenix Rain's eyes widened in shock when she heard Shadow Flower's response. Zero Wing. This was a guild that had been established only recently in God's domain, and it experienced a meteoric rise that confused many players and powers. Whether it was the Star Alliance or the 100 Flower Palace, both were large guilds with strong potential to become superpowers in the future. They also had many talented rookies who had made a name for themselves in God's domain's A-League, and it wouldn't be strange for them to advance to Tier 6 in the future. Yet, despite having such excellent circumstances, the Star Alliance and the 100 Flower Palace had both chosen to disband and merge into Zero Wing. Apart from them, Mysterious Moon, another first-rate guild, had similarly chosen to merge into Zero Wing. Zero Wing's appearance had shaken the entire God's domain. After all, this was a merger of 3 first-rate guilds they were talking about. Among them, there were even pseudo-superpowers like the Star Alliance and the 100 Flower Palace. The combined strength of these 3 guilds could strike fear into even veteran superpowers like the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. In fact, in terms of Tier 6 experts, Zero Wing already had more than what some veteran super guilds possessed. This was also why Phoenix Rain had chosen to partner with Zero Wing to explore the ruined temple this time. Meanwhile, seeing as Zero Wing could convince 3 first-rate guilds to merge into one guild, many people, including Phoenix Rain, felt that whoever was helming the guild must possess unbelievable strength and connections. So, what was up with this level 178, Tier 6 swordsman? You are Zero Wing's guild leader? Ji Luorong couldn't help but turn to look at Shifeng in surprise. Ji Luorong had a much better understanding of Shadow Flower than Phoenix Rain. The woman was incredibly ambitious, so much so that she dreamed of one day having the 100 Flower Palace stand shoulder to shoulder with the 5 great super guilds. It was because of this that Ji Luorong found it unbelievable when she initially heard Shadow Flower had disbanded the 100 Flower Palace and had all of its members join Zero Wing. For a time, she even suspected that Zero Wing was a product of the Green God Corporation. Otherwise, there was no explanation for why an ambitious person like Shadow Flower would disband the 100 Flower Palace. After all, the 100 Flower Palace's growth potential was superior to even the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, let alone the Star Alliance. It was just that this matter was something only Ji Luorong knew. As for how the 100 Flower Palace could have such potential, it was because of 2 factors. Firstly, it was because Shadow Flower herself was an SSS rank expert. Secondly, it was because Crimson Heart and Cleansed Rue, 2 of the 100 Flower Palace's vice guild leaders, had the potential to become SSS rank experts. While SSS rank experts might be exceedingly rare to most superpowers, that was not the case for the 100-Flower Palace. That's right. I am Zero Wings Guild leader, Shifeng said, smiling as he looked at the shocked look on Ji Luorong. Surprised? Of course. How can I not be surprised? Ji Luorong retorted as she looked at Shifeng's smiling face. We are talking about Zero Wings Guild leader here. Until now, everyone has been guessing that Zero Wings Guild leader is actually an old monster from the Green God Corporation. How can you be so young? Am I not allowed to be Zero Wings Guild leader simply because I am young? Shifeng chuckled. That's not what I meant. After reorganizing her thoughts, Ji Luorong said, what I'm saying is that Zero Wings Guild leader should be an expert capable of ranking among the 10 saints. Otherwise, there's no way someone like Shadow Flower would willingly submit to Zero Wing. The 10 saints. That's not a hard standard to achieve, Shifeng said. If you join Zero Wing, I promise you can reach it in a day. A day. Keep on boasting. Ji Luorong rolled her eyes at Shifeng. She did not believe his words in the slightest. The 10 saints represented the apex of combat power in their god's domain. Although there were still some hidden old monsters who had chosen not to compete for a position among the 10 saints, the 10 saints were still part of the strongest group of experts in their god's domain. Meanwhile, the condition to become one of the 10 saints was incredibly stringent. Not only did players need to have sufficiently high combat standards, but they would also need to have sufficiently good weapons and equipment. Simply having one legendary weapon wouldn't suffice. Players would need at least several pieces of legendary equipment paired with a legendary weapon. However, legendary weapons and equipment were incredibly rare in God's domain. Even for the 5 great super guilds, it was incredibly difficult for them to equip a player with so many legendary items. Naturally, it would be even more difficult for other guilds to accomplish it. As for independent players or members of adventurer teams, it would take nothing short of a miracle for them to accomplish such a feat throughout their god's domain's history. Only one player had managed to join the ranks of the 10 saints without being backed by a guild. That person was a legendary individual, and they were also ranked as the number 1 expert on the god's domain experts list at the time. Only, that person had disappeared all of a sudden, and rarely would anybody talk about them nowadays. Although Ji Luorong was confident in her strength, she knew she still had a long way to go to match the 10 saints. She would need at least several more years of accumulation before she could truly try to challenge those individuals. Yet, Shifeng was saying that so long as she joined Zero Wing, he would need only a day to give her the strength of the 10 saints. No matter how she looked at it, Shifeng must be joking with her. What if I can do it? Shifeng chuckled when he saw how Ji Luorong was doubting him, his words filled with provocation and temptation. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3620, Chapter 694, One Move to Slay the 7 Sins. Chapter 3620, Chapter 694, One Move to Slay the 7 Sins. Chapter 694. One move to slay the 7 sins. How can he still talk to someone else so casually after provoking the flower of 7 sins? Does he really think Shadow Flower and Purple Eye can protect him? When Phoenix Rain saw Shifeng leisurely conversing with Ji Luorong, confusion colored her pale golden eyes. She had met and clashed with many people in her time leading the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, and this wealth of experience had given her the ability to discern a person's inner emotions. Whether a person was secretly feeling anger, fear, or hesitation, she could tell with just a glance. Because of this ability, she could often gain the upper hand over her opponent, whether in battle or negotiations. This, in turn, allowed the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion to achieve much greater heights under her leadership. Logically, now that Shifeng had provoked the Flower of 7 Sins, an organization feared by all in God's domain, he should be feeling fearful, if not worried, at the very least. After all, even the 5 great super guilds' guild leaders would feel a hint of anxiety if they ended up provoking the Flower of 7 Sins. However, the only emotion Phoenix Rain could see in Shifeng was calmness. It was as if what he just did was insignificant, and the Flower of 7 Sins' 7 Tier 6 experts were of no threat to him. In the meantime, Shadowflower and Purple Eye looked like they were going up against a mighty foe as they faced Hyena's group of 6. They focused all their 5 senses on the group, not daring to relax in the slightest. After all, while they might be apex experts in God's domain, their chances of victory were still slim if they had to go up against 6 of the Flower of 7 Sins Tier 6 experts simultaneously. They would be walking a tightrope, and a single mistake could spell their doom. "Are you sure there's nothing wrong with our guild leader, Palace Master Flower?" Purple Eye asked Shadowflower, exasperated by Shifeng's behavior. The Star Alliance's merger into Zero Wing was handled fully by Galaxy Past, the Star Alliance's former guild leader. Although Purple Eye was a Grand Elder of the Star Alliance, she did not know the details surrounding the merger, and she only agreed to it because she trusted in Galaxy Past's judgment of the future. As a result, she did not know anything else about Black Flame besides him being Zero Wing's guild leader and the #1 player in the miniature ancient world. Purple Eye couldn't be faulted for her ignorance. Most players developing on the main continent did not pay attention to the miniature ancient world's affairs. This was because most of those who had entered the miniature ancient world were either new players or players looking for a new beginning after failing to succeed on the main continent. In the real world, most people still placed all of their attention on the main continent, wanting to make a name for themselves amidst countless famous experts. After all, the main continent's resources were far more abundant than the miniature ancient world. Although the main continent's various powers had indeed sent some members to develop in the miniature ancient world, most had done so with a mentality of testing the waters. Few had mobilized noteworthy amounts of manpower and strength. However, it was a different story for the 100-Flower Palace. The 100-Flower Palace had invested heavily into the miniature ancient world, going as far as to send 2 of its vice-guild leaders, who had the potential to advance to Tier 6, to the miniature ancient world. In addition, with how ambitious of a person Shadowflower was, the fact that she would choose to merge the 100-Flower Palace into Zero Wing proved that she understood Zero Wing well. Otherwise, she would never take such a crazy action. If we are speaking solely about combat standards, our guild leader should rank within the top 3 of our God's domain, Shadowflower said after giving Purple Eye's question some thought. Then, she hesitantly continued, although he is currently rather low-leveled, he should be able to handle one of the Flower of 7 Sins Black players. Based on Crimson Heart and Cleansed Ruse accounts, Shifeng was undoubtedly a 5th floor expert. Moreover, he had mastered at least 1 gold combat technique. If not for the 5 great super guilds having 2 unreasonably strong old monsters, Shadowflower would dare say that Shifeng could rank #1 in their God's domain. However, combat standards did not represent all of a player's strength in God's domain. Levels also played a vital role. If the level difference between 2 players got too large, it might create a gap in basic attributes and physique so large that it could not be bridged by technique alone. Not to mention, level 200 was a major turning point for players. In Shadowflower's opinion, Shifeng would not stand a chance if he were to fight against a 4th floor expert like Hyena. But if it was the Flower of 7 Sins Black players, who were only at the domain realm standard, he should be able to hold his ground. Only 1 black player? Purple Eye's expression grew solemn when she heard Shadowflower's answer. If that's the case, our only choice is to escape. Otherwise, once Bloodsand takes action, none of us can leave this place alive. Previously, they could only hold their ground against the Flower of 7 Sins 7 Tier 6 experts because they were working together with Phoenix Rain. Now that Phoenix Rain's stance remained unclear, they could only hope for her presence to keep Bloodsand in check. This would leave them having to deal with 6 of the Flower of 7 Sins Tier 6 experts. And with Shifeng being able to deal with only 1 black player, nothing would change. But they would be doomed once Bloodsand deemed it safe to take action. Finally starting to feel scared, Hyena smirked when he saw Purple Eye vaguely showing intentions to retreat. But don't you think it's a little too late? As soon as Hyena finished speaking, he suddenly vanished into thin air. At the same time, 3 black players attacked Shadowflower, while the remaining 2 attacked Purple Eye, giving them no opportunities to run to Shifeng's aid. Damn it! When Shadowflower saw Hyena disappearing, she immediately activated her Tier 6 legacy skill Dark Phantom and split into 5 copies of herself. Each of these doppelgangers had 100% of her basic attributes. They could also use all of her skills and spells. However, they could only last a minute, and the skill had a 1-hour cooldown. After activating Dark Phantom, Shadow Flower had her doppelgangers intercept Hyena. However, even after focusing all their senses on scanning the surrounding area, they failed to locate Hyena's presence. Hyena's stealth capabilities were unbelievable, and it was as if he did not exist in this space. Meanwhile, Hyena's disappearance also interrupted Ji Luorong, who had been deep in thought. Then, she turned to Shifeng and asked, "Do you need my help?" Ji Luorong was very interested in Shifeng's offer. Although she still didn't fully trust his words, she wouldn't simply stand by and watch Hyena kill Shifeng. "No need. It's only a 4th-floor expert," Shifeng said, shaking his head. Then, he unsheathed the Winter of Eternal Night and brandished it. Swords orbit. Suddenly, numerous sword lights intersected, and a galaxy of stars covering a 1,000-yard radius appeared with Shifeng at its center. Hundreds of stars circled around Shifeng, each carrying the strength of a level 200, tier 6 god. Even level 200 divine monsters would be sent flying if these stars struck them. After the Winter of Eternal Night was upgraded to the legendary rank, Shifeng's basic attributes skyrocketed. Even at level 178, his basic attributes could already closely rival level 200, tier 6 gods. Even in his home god's domain, his basic attributes could already rank at the top. This was also why he dared to return to his home god's domain. Not to mention, he also had a superior divine body to enhance his mana and reactions. A moment later, Shifeng sheathed his weapon, and the galaxy of stars faded out of existence. At the same time, a short figure fell out of the void and collapsed on the ground, the person's equipment in tatters and body covered in bone-deep cuts. The person's HP bar was also empty, indicating that they had become a corpse. Meanwhile, this short figure was none other than Hyena, the person who had vanished just a moment ago. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3621, Chapter 695, Saint Production. Chapter 3621, Chapter 695, Saint Production. Chapter 695, Saint Production. Hyena's dead? How did he die? What did that swordsman do? Everyone present, whether it was the Dragon Phoenix Pavilions or the Flower of Seven Sins members, couldn't help but doubt their eyes when they saw the scene before them. Hyena was the Sin of Wrath's vice-commander and second strongest member after Bloodsand. He was only slightly weaker than Shadow Flower and Purple Eye in overall strength, and he had incredible stealth capabilities. With sufficient preparations, he could successfully assassinate even Shadow Flower and Purple Eye. Isn't he a little too strong? Purple Eye couldn't help but gasp as she looked at Hyena's corpse. At the same time, she couldn't help but suspect Shadow Flower of messing with her before. He should be able to handle one of the Flower of Seven Sins black players. What kind of nonsense was that? It should be known that Shadow Flower was very skilled at detecting signs of life. Yet, even she had failed to detect Hyena when he was under stealth. In contrast, despite being only a level 178 sword god, Shifeng managed to kill Hyena in one move and accomplished it before Hyena revealed himself. His strength was already beyond Purple Eye's comprehension. His comparable to a level 200, tier 6 god. Shadow Flower was equally shocked by this turn of events, and she couldn't help but scrutinize Shifeng's calm figure. Shifeng's strength was miles apart from what she heard from Crimson Heart and Cleansed Rue. How did you do it? Ji Luorong asked in confusion as she watched Shifeng sheath his sword. Hyena had already developed his stealth capabilities to a level where even the current 10 saints could not detect him. If it were up to the 10 saints, they would have to wait until Hyena attacked them before executing a targeted response. Not to mention, Shifeng had even killed Hyena in one move. Admittedly, Shifeng's attack that had reached the standard of a level 200, tier 6 god was very powerful. However, it definitely wasn't enough to kill Hyena. After all, Hyena was a level 210, tier 6 assassin equipped with a legendary dagger. The rest of his equipment was also at the fragmented legendary rank. Even if he fought against an actual level 200, tier 6 god, he could survive for a long time. Yet, Hyena failed to survive even one move against Shifeng. This situation confused Ji Luorong greatly, and she couldn't understand how Shifeng had accomplished this feat, no matter how she thought about it. It's nothing special. Seeing the confusion on Ji Luorong's face, Shifeng nonchalantly said, he might have concealed himself well, but his concealment is pointless in front of my sixth sense. His reaction speed also can't keep up with my attack rate, so it's only natural for him to die. Under the same basic attributes, 5th floor experts had an insurmountable advantage over 4th floor experts. No matter what a 4th floor expert tried to do, all of their actions would be laid bare in front of a 5th floor expert. Meanwhile, with this knowledge, a 5th floor expert could effortlessly misdirect a 4th floor expert's movements and attack trajectories, creating many opportunities to bypass the 4th floor expert's defenses. Not to mention, although Shifeng was only at level 178, he was vastly superior to Hyena in both basic attributes and physique. So, it was only natural for him to kill Hyena in one exchange. However, despite how casually Shifeng described his actions, Ji Luorong still couldn't help but be shocked. It's only natural for him to die. Ji Luorong didn't know how Shifeng could speak such words so nonchalantly. After all was said and done, Hyena was a tier 6 4th floor expert. He was an existence whom even the 10 saints could not kill in one move. In fact, Ji Luorong doubted she was any stronger than Hyena. Yet, Shifeng spoke as if experts of her caliber were nothing but a bunch of noobs. Meanwhile, after this sudden turn of events, Bloodsand, who had been warily watching Phoenix Rain's movements, couldn't help but turn to look at Shifeng with a grim expression. Currently, his gaze no longer contained the calmness and anger it had before. Instead, deep-seated fear had replaced it. He never thought Shifeng could be this strong. Only, before Bloodsand and everyone else could react, Shifeng suddenly appeared before the flower of 7 Sin's 5 black players and executed Sword's Orbit once more. Although the 5 black players had instinctively activated their life-saving skills and tried to flee, they lasted no more than 2 seconds in the face of Shifeng's sword lights, and they dropped numerous weapons and equipment following their death. It was a fight that couldn't even be considered a fight. Everyone was stunned once again. These were 5 tier 6 experts they were talking about. Yet, they had disappeared in the blink of an eye. Previously, everyone still found Shifeng's achievement of killing Hyena in one move a little unrealistic. After all, Hyena was already dead when they saw him. This time, though, they saw very clearly how Shifeng dealt with the 5 black players. A crushing defeat. It was an absolutely crushing defeat. Moreover, Shifeng had single-handedly killed 6 of the Sin of Wrath's tier 6 experts. What he just did was essentially strike the Sin of Wrath to the bottom of the flower of 7 Sin's 7 sins. If the Sin of Wrath couldn't quickly help these 6 experts replenish their lost weapons and equipment, it would be a long time before the Sin of Wrath could hold its head high in the flower of 7 sins. Black Flame. You bastard. Bloodsand glared at Shifeng with a manic look. How dare you kill 6 of the flower of 7 sins tier 6 experts? I will never spare you or Zero Wing. Just you wait. The flower of 7 sins retribution will come for you. The death of these 6 tier 6 experts was a significant loss to the flower of 7 sins and Bloodsand himself. After all, he only had a few tier 6 experts under his command, and 3 of the black players killed this time were even the subordinates of other commanders. Is that so? I look forward to it. While watching Bloodsand lose his mind, Shifeng slashed downward with the Winter of Eternal Night. Third sword, Holy Annihilation. Immediately, a pillar of flames devoured Bloodsand and the space around him. Even though Bloodsand had tried to defend himself with his two-handed saber, the impact still plundered all of his HP, and he dropped multiple pieces of equipment when he died. Aside from Bloodsand, all of the tier 5 experts from the flower of 7 sins standing behind him were also reduced to ashes, their deaths contributing a bunch of weapons and equipment to Shifeng. All of the Sin of Wrath's tier 6 experts were annihilated. Phoenix Rain couldn't help but look at the situation before her with widened eyes. She never thought Shifeng would dare to provoke the flower of 7 sins so thoroughly. Since its fight with the 5 great super guilds, The Flower of Seven Sins had never suffered as much damage as it did today. Not only did all of the Sin of Wrath's Tier 6 experts get annihilated, but even Bloodsand, the Sin of Wrath's commander, was killed. This was absolutely the greatest humiliation the Flower of Seven Sins had suffered since its inception. Guild leader, once news of the Sin of Wrath's Tier 6 experts getting annihilated reaches the Flower of Seven Sins executives, I'm afraid all of Zero Wing's guild residences will be in big trouble, Shadow Flower said with a wry smile. The Flower of Seven Sins was known for exacting revenge on all who offended them. Now that Shifeng had caused the Flower of Seven Sins to suffer such a huge loss, there was no doubt the organization would use its full strength to deal with Zero Wing. It should be known that the Flower of Seven Sins experts far outnumbered Zero Wing's experts. If the Flower of Seven Sins attacked Zero Wing's guild residences, it would cause devastating damage to Zero Wing. That might have been true in the past, but the era of this god's domain has already changed now that I am here, Shifeng said nonchalantly. I can produce even experts on the 10 Saints level in batches. How many of such experts can the Flower of Seven Sins resist? 10. 20. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3606, Chapter 680, Sun Dynasty's Ultimatum. Chapter 3606, Chapter 680, Sun Dynasty's Ultimatum. Chapter 680, Sun Dynasty's Ultimatum. What an incredible improvement. Shifeng couldn't help but be astonished when he saw the legendary Winter of Eternal Night stats. In his previous life, apart from having a superior divine body, another one of the key reasons he could thrive shortly after entering the Greater God's domain was due to Solomon's Sword, a legendary weapon he had gone through great lengths to obtain. The weapon was also regarded as one of the 10 great legendary weapons of his home god's domain. Meanwhile, after ascending to the legendary rank, the Winter of Eternal Night's basic attributes could already rival Solomon's Sword. Moreover, unlike Solomon's Sword, the Winter of Eternal Night still had room for growth. When Shifeng grabbed the dark blue sword hovering before him, silver patterns lit up across the blade, and the temperature of the surrounding environment plummeted. Shifeng could also feel the flow of time in his surroundings slowing down. Is this the Winter of Eternal Night's hidden ability? Excitement filled Shifeng when he sensed the changes in the surrounding space. After equipping the Winter of Eternal Night, he could feel that the flow of time around him had become slower than normal. Although it was only a minor decrease of about 25%, it would still help him significantly in battle. It would be especially so in battles against other Tier 6 players. Combat at Tier 6 was much more unforgiving than combat at lower tiers. This was due to Tier 6 players having extraordinary attack power. Unless one possessed items such as the Sunlight Blade, under the same equipment standard, even a single mistake could lead to players going from full HP to becoming a corpse in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, the Winter of Eternal Night's hidden ability to affect time would not only grant its wielder more time to react to enemy attacks, but it would also improve the wielder's reaction speed, movement speed, attack speed, and spellcasting speed. It was an all-round buff that was much superior to a buff that merely increased reaction speed. Paired with the Winter of Eternal Night's basic attributes, Shifeng felt he could fight against even ancient gods of the same level. While Shifeng was taking his time experiencing the Winter of Eternal Night's changes, Hidden Soul and Gentle Snow suddenly entered his tent. Guild leader, something big happened, Hidden Soul solemnly said. Just a while ago, the Holy Race's Sun Dynasty issued an ultimatum to the Seven Luminaries Alliance. They demand the Alliance to hand over Chalk Splendor's killer and the Sunlight Blade. Otherwise, they will destroy all of the Alliance's resurrection camps at any cost, making it impossible for the Alliance to establish a foothold in the world arc. They're threatening the Seven Luminaries Alliance directly? Shifeng's expression also grew serious when he heard this. Although Shifeng had long guessed that the Sun Dynasty wouldn't remain silent over Chalk Splendor's death and the loss of the Sunlight Blade, he never thought the Sun Dynasty would be so ruthless as to threaten the Seven Luminaries Alliance. Should we return to the Crystal City immediately, Guild leader? Gentle Snow asked. What the Sun Dynasty just did was incredibly ruthless. Rather than find trouble with Zero Wing, The Sun Dynasty had chosen to target the Seven Luminaries Alliance, forcing the Alliance to take action against Zero Wing. As the Sun Dynasty was a holy race power, it would normally need to go through the apex powers fighting at the forefront if it wished to target Zero Wing. This would make it very difficult for the Sun Dynasty to do anything to Zero Wing. However, it was a different story for the Seven Luminaries Alliance. The Seven Luminaries Alliance was one of the human race's apex powers. Setting aside the Alliance's influence over the human race's greater god's domain, simply the strength it possessed in the Eternal Realm could let it easily suppress Zero Wing. To make matters worse, the Seven Luminaries Alliance was planning to develop in the world arc, so it did have a reason to fear the Sun Dynasty's all-out targeting. Meanwhile, so long as the Seven Luminaries Alliance decided to take action against Zero Wing, it would be nigh impossible for Zero Wing to survive. It's too soon to make any conclusions, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Also, it's unlikely the Seven Luminaries Alliance will leave us out to dry. A more likely scenario is that the Alliance will have us hand over the Sunlight Blade. After all, the Alliance still needs to maintain its reputation. So, we should wait and see what the Alliance decides to do first before jumping to conclusions. Now that Zero Wing had secured a resurrection camp in the World Arc's inner area, it could finally start making large amounts of money in the Eternal Realm. Not to mention, Zero Wing would also have an advantage over other powers when it came to entering the Holy Ring City. If Zero Wing were to abandon its development in the World Arc now, its losses would be massive. Not to mention, Zero Wing played a vital role in helping the Seven Luminaries Alliance resist the Sun Dynasty. Even if the Sun Dynasty planned to go all out, it was highly unlikely the Seven Luminaries Alliance would choose to hand over Shifeng, Chalk Splendor's killer. Otherwise, the Alliance's reputation would be ruined, and its influence over the greater god's domain would wane. So, what Zero Wing needed to do now was wait for the Seven Luminaries Alliance to finish negotiating the Sun Dynasty and see to what extent the Alliance was willing to compromise. When Hidden Soul and Gentle Snow heard Shifeng's reasoning, they decided to go with Shifeng's arrangement and wait for the Seven Luminaries Alliance's response. Apart from the Soul Lake's resurrection camp, a commotion also occurred across the World Arc's various resurrection camps following the Sun Dynasty's ultimatum. Ha ha ha. I knew the Sun Dynasty wouldn't let Zero Wing get away so easily, 19th Sword happily said after reading the report he just received. So what if Black Flame is one of the Eternal Realm's top 5 experts? In the end, he still has to withdraw from the World Arc. Zero Wing is indeed quite pitiful, Milia said, feeling a hint of sympathy for Zero Wing. When it comes to military strength, the Sun Dynasty is evidently superior to the Seven Luminaries Alliance. If the Alliance wishes to avoid tragic losses in the Eternal Realm and appease the Sun Dynasty, the least it will need to do is to have Zero Wing permanently withdraw from the World Arc. As for Zero Wing, the best it could hope for is some compensation from the Seven Luminaries Alliance. The World Arc was a world mode regional dungeon, and it was one of the key regions for powers to establish a foothold in the Eternal Realm. If Zero Wing could not extend its development into the World Arc, even with a mighty expert like Black Flame leading it, it would ultimately still be reduced to a second-rate power in the Eternal Realm. Subsequently, time passed quickly. While the various powers and players were discussing what decision the Seven Luminaries Alliance would ultimately make, the Soul Lake's resurrection camp welcomed a group of Seven Luminaries Alliance members. So they've still come in the end, unrestrained Lionheart muttered with a wry smile when he saw the Seven Luminaries Alliance members riding atop the approaching Tier 5, flying mount. Then, he turned to Fry and asked with a complicated heart, "Are we really going to continue standing on the same front as Zero Wing?" "We have no choice but to take the gamble," Fry replied resolutely as she looked at the approaching flying mount. With the World Arc's current state, it was simply impossible for just 2 or 3 pseudo-apex powers to adequately defend a resurrection camp in the inner area. Without Zero Wing's help, the Red Dragon Nation would lose the ability to secure an early advantage in the World Arc's inner area. Meanwhile, even if the Seven Luminaries Alliance chose to compromise with the Sun Dynasty and Zero Wing refused to comply, the most the Alliance would do was let the Sun Dynasty fight Zero Wing without interfering. So, Fry planned to continue standing on the same front as Zero Wing. Although this would put the Red Dragon Nation directly in the Sun Dynasty's line of sight, the Red Dragon Nation would at least still have a chance at securing an early advantage in the World Ark's inner area. A short moment later, a 60-meter-tall two-headed blaze eagle landed in the middle of the Resurrection Camp. Then, more than 50 Tier 6 experts wearing the Seven Luminaries Alliance's guild emblem alighted from the blaze eagle, and walking in the lead was a middle-aged man who was a level 173, Tier 6 mage god. "Who among you is Black Flame?" the middle-aged mage god asked as he scanned the crowd in the Resurrection Camp. "If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3607, Chapter 681, Responding in Kind. Chapter 3607, Chapter 681, Responding in Kind. Chapter 681, Responding in Kind. Soul Lake, Resurrection Camp. Following the middle-aged mage god's words, a powerful divine might swept across the Resurrection Camp, and everyone in the camp felt like a mountain had just fallen on their shoulders. The pressure from the divine might was so intense that all of the Tier 5 players in the camp had difficulty breathing, and even those capable of matching Tier 6 experts found themselves immobilized. A divine domain. Disbelief filled Garut's eyes as he looked at the middle-aged mage god. In God's domain, players could typically only radiate divine might after reaching Tier 6. Meanwhile, once players developed their concentration to the extremes of the Tier 6 standard, they could mentally manipulate their divine might to form a domain, which was also known as a divine domain. Meanwhile, once a divine domain was unleashed, it could suppress players below Tier 6 effortlessly and subject Tier 6 experts to a powerful mental suppression, rendering them incapable of executing their combat techniques and mana techniques normally. And even if they managed to execute their techniques, it would put a huge toll on their concentration. Who is this person? What kind of status does he have in the Seven Luminaries Alliance? Fry was similarly shocked as she looked at the middle-aged mage god. According to the Red Dragon Nation's intelligence, there were no more than 20 divine domain experts across the Greater God's domain. However, the middle-aged mage god was never mentioned in the Red Dragon Nation's intelligence. "I am." A moment after the middle-aged mage god unleashed his divine domain, a deep voice echoed throughout the Resurrection Camp. Immediately afterward, Shifeng stepped out of the crowd and approached the middle-aged mage god in a steady stride. He also gave off the feeling of a primordial giant, and those he walked past felt their hearts instinctively shudder. When Shifeng arrived before the Seven Luminaries Alliance's members, the terrifying aura he radiated caused even the Alliance's Tier 6 experts to lower their heads and avoid his gaze, all of them afraid to catch his attention. "Incredible, as expected. No wonder Little Rainbow has praised you so highly," the middle-aged mage god said, smiling as he looked at Shifeng. "I am Aimless Bloodshed, a core elder of the Seven Luminaries Alliance. I am here this time to talk to you about the Sun Dynasty's matter, guild leader Black Flame." Aimless Bloodshed? Shifeng briefly fell into a daze when he heard the middle-aged mage god's introduction. Experts whose concentration had reached the extremes of Tier 6 were exceedingly rare in the Greater God's domain. In the current timeline, the existence of the Seven Luminaries Alliance's Aimless Bloodshed was indeed unknown to the Greater God's domain. However, in Shifeng's previous life, Aimless Bloodshed was incredibly famous during the war between the two races. He made his debut on the public stage in a major battle during the war, and he revealed himself as a divine domain expert as soon as he appeared. Meanwhile, with the help of his divine staff Divine Spirit, he could rank among the Greater God's domain's top 3 when it came to mental attacks. Though, for some reason, the first time Aimless Bloodshed made a public appearance was also his last. He never participated in any subsequent battles, and nobody was able to uncover much information about him. "May I know what the Seven Luminaries Alliance has decided, Elder Bloodshed?" Shifeng asked. The Sun Dynasty has reacted intensely this time, but the Seven Luminaries Alliance is no pushover, either. Chuckling, Aimless Bloodshed said, "Based on our negotiations with the Sun Dynasty, we can offer 0 Wing 2 options." 2, is it? When Shifeng heard Aimless Bloodshed's words, he could more or less guess what the other party would say next. The first option is for 0 Wing to hand over the Sunlight Blade and withdraw from the World Ark. In return, The Sun Dynasty will give Zero Wing 3 pieces of universal legendary equipment and let this matter slide, Aimless Bloodshed said. Should the Sun Dynasty dare renege on its promise, the 7 Luminaries Alliance will respond in kind. As for the second option, Zero Wing will similarly have to hand over the Sunlight Blade, but the Sun Dynasty won't offer any compensation. Instead, Zero Wing may continue competing in the World Arc. Upon hearing Aimless Bloodshed's words, many of the players present couldn't help but be surprised. They didn't think the 7 Luminaries Alliance would ultimately offer Zero Wing such lenient choices. The second option was especially lenient. Although Zero Wing would lose its spoils of war, it could still retain its advantages in the World Arc. This was undoubtedly the best outcome for Zero Wing. These are already the best conditions the 7 Luminaries Alliance can fight for Zero Wing, Guild Leader Black Flame, Aimless Bloodshed said in a somewhat embarrassed tone. The Sun Dynasty's combat power in the World Arc is slightly superior to the 7 Luminaries Alliance. If the Sun Dynasty tries to attack us with zero regard to cost, we will have difficulty defending our current resurrection camps. I understand. Shifeng nodded. He knew the 7 Luminaries Alliance had already taken out its greatest sincerity. The fact that the 7 Luminaries Alliance had even sent a big shot like Aimless Bloodshed to persuade Zero Wing showed how much the Alliance valued Zero Wing. May I ask you a question? Feel free to ask anything, Guild Leader Black Flame, Aimless Bloodshed answered, smiling. If Zero Wing goes to war with the Sun Dynasty, can the 7 Luminaries Alliance remain neutral? Shifeng calmly asked. Go to war with the Sun Dynasty? Aimless Bloodshed froze momentarily, his mind failing to process Shifeng's words. Yes. Zero Wing will go to war with the Sun Dynasty, Shifeng stated resolutely. The Sunlight Blade was one of the Sun Dynasty's 7 arcanas. Its value was extraordinary, and it could easily be traded with the Holy Race for 2 universal divine artifacts. The Sun Dynasty's compensation of 3 pieces of legendary equipment was nothing but a joke. In his previous life, he never got the opportunity to own even 1 divine artifact. Now that he had a chance to own 2, he naturally wouldn't abandon it easily. It was especially so now that he had upgraded the Winter of Eternal Night to the legendary rank. In the World Arc, he had no need to fear the Sun Dynasty. This, after hearing that Shifeng was serious, Aimless Bloodshed couldn't help but say, "Are you really going to provoke the Sun Dynasty, Guild Leader Black Flame? That's one of the Holy Race's 10 royal powers we are talking about. It is a tough opponent, even for the 7 Luminaries Alliance." At this moment, Aimless Bloodshed felt that Shifeng must have lost his mind. After all, an upstart power in the Eternal Realm was trying to pick a fight with an opponent that even the 7 Luminaries Alliance dreaded. This was no different than having a death wish. While Zero Wing might not be a royal power, we won't capitulate just because of a few words. In a resolute tone, Shifeng said, since the Sun Dynasty insists on using force, we will simply respond in kind. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3608, Chapter 682, World Gate's Initial Appearance. Chapter 3608, Chapter 682, World Gate's Initial Appearance. Chapter 682, World Gate's Initial Appearance. Is he crazy? Unrestrained Lionheart couldn't help but doubt his ears when he heard Shifeng's resolute words. Is he not afraid that Zero Wing would be erased from God's domain? Anyone who had participated in the defense of the 7 Luminaries Alliance's resurrection camps should know how powerful the Holy Race's royal powers were by now. It simply wasn't possible for any human power to resist a royal power on its own. Even an existence as mighty as the 7 Luminaries Alliance could just barely resist the Sun Dynasty. Although Shifeng was a taboo-level expert, an existence such as the Sun Dynasty should have quite a few such experts. Even if Shifeng could ensure his own safety, what about the rest of Zero Wing? At this time, Fry was similarly surprised by this situation. She didn't think Shifeng would refuse both options proposed. The second option, in particular, could already be considered generous. All Zero Wing needed to do was to surrender the Sunlight Blade to retain its ability to develop in the World Arc. As for negotiating a fair deal with the Sun Dynasty, That was simply out of the question. After all, there was a huge gap in strength between both parties. Sure enough. When Hidden Soul heard Shifeng's resolute reply, she couldn't help but wryly smile. As expected of our guild leader. Battle. In the early phases of the miniature ancient world, Shifeng had stood strong in the face of overwhelming odds and single-handedly caused the various superpowers to suffer severe losses. Now that Zero Wing had entered the Eternal Realm and achieved metamorphosis, there was no way he would allow Zero Wing to capitulate so easily. Indeed. We will simply respond in kind. Gentle Snow nodded, fighting spirit burning in her eyes. The Sun Dynasty might be a frightening existence, but Zero Wing wasn't a pushover, either. It was especially so now that Zero Wing's guild residents had a secret room capable of increasing players' chances of getting promoted to Tier 6. As for herself, if she could fight against more experts and perfect her techniques, her strength would also increase with time. Is Zero Wing made up of lunatics? When Garut saw the enthusiastic look on Gentle Snow and Zero Wing's other members, he couldn't help but be astonished. The Sun Dynasty had already proven itself to be superior to the Seven Luminaries Alliance in combat. Logically, all powers should be doing their best to avoid confrontations with the Sun Dynasty. Yet, even though Zero Wing was clearly presented with an opportunity for reconciliation, Shifeng chose to take the initiative to provoke the Sun Dynasty. Moreover, aside from Shifeng, the rest of the Zero Wing members also shared a similar sentiment. It was as if the entire guild was made up of lunatics. Can the Seven Luminaries Alliance remain neutral, Elder Bloodshed? Shifeng asked once more as he looked at the dazed middle-aged man before him. Although I haven't consulted with my superiors, I can say with certainty that the Seven Luminaries Alliance is a human power, so we will never side with the Holy Race, Aimless Bloodshed said confidently. If anyone dares to assist the Holy Race, I will be the first to object. Thank you very much, Elder Bloodshed, Shifeng gratefully said. Subsequently, Aimless Bloodshed quickly left for one of the Seven Luminaries Alliance's resurrection camps to report Zero Wing's decision to his superiors and have them prepare for the inevitable. Time passed quickly. Several hours after Zero Wing made its decision, the World Ark's various powers also learned of the outcome, and a huge commotion swept across the entire Eternal Realm. It should be known that not even the various pseudo-apex powers would dare to publicly challenge one of the Holy Race's royal powers. Yet, Zero Wing, an upstart guild in the Eternal Realm, had done it. This was undoubtedly the most shocking piece of news to date in the Eternal Realm. At the same time, because the Seven Luminaries Alliance had finished establishing its defenses in the World Ark's inner area, it no longer restricted players from entering the inner area. And as Zero Wing managed to safely occupy the Soul Lake's resurrection camp, many players flocked to the camp. After much deliberation, Shifeng ultimately decided to charge each player 20 Eternal Silver for registering at the resurrection camp. This might be a significant sum for Tier 5 players operating in the Eternal Realm, but many players still chose to register at the Soul Lake's resurrection camp regardless. After only a day, over 50,000 players had registered at the camp already. After all, so long as players registered at a resurrection camp in the inner area, not only could they be resurrected in the World Ark's inner area, but the death penalty they suffered could also be reduced. Even if this was only the fee for one registration, it was still a worthwhile trade considering the potential profits they could gain from the World Ark's inner area. If not for many players being wary of the Sun Dynasty, many more players would have come to register at the Soul Lake's resurrection camp. What do you think is going on with the Sun Dynasty, guild leader? It's been more than a day since our response, yet they still haven't shown any signs of taking action, Hidden Soul said in confusion. More and more players were coming to register at the Soul Lake's resurrection camp, yet not a single Holy Race player had appeared near the camp thus far. Could they simply be trying to intimidate us, but in reality, they don't actually have the strength to deal with us? Ever since the Seven Luminaries Alliance forwarded Zero Wing's rejection, the Sun Dynasty did not make a single response. In fact, according to Zero Wing's investigation, the Sun Dynasty had even reduced its activities at the inner area's frontlines. They are merely gathering their strength, Shifeng said nonchalantly. They are aware that I have killed Chalk Splendor and can summon 6 Tier 6 war goddesses, So they know that if they want to destroy Zero Wing and intimidate the human race, they will need to gather much more strength. Not to mention, the Holy Race has many Tier 5 experts capable of advancing to Tier 6. They simply lack the necessary resources to get promoted. In that case, should we have more of our internal 5th floor experts enter the secret room and advance to Tier 6, Guild Leader? Hidden Soul asked worriedly. The Sun Dynasty undoubtedly had a frightening number of Tier 5 experts capable of advancing to Tier 6. In comparison, although Zero Wing had a medium world fragment, for the sake of secrecy, they only dared to let trustworthy members enjoy the medium world fragment's benefits thus far. As a result, Zero Wing didn't have many experts capable of completing their Tier 6 promotion at a reliable success rate. If this situation persisted, Zero Wing would only become more disadvantaged over time in the world arc. Shifeng couldn't help but hesitate. Admittedly, letting more internal members enjoy the medium world fragment's benefits and advance to Tier 6 would increase Zero Wing's overall strength. However, it would also increase the risk of exposing the medium world fragment's existence. After all, most of Zero Wing's internal members in the Crystal City of Secrets weren't based in Star Lake City in the real world. It was unrealistic to think that everyone could keep this matter a secret. Meanwhile, once the medium world fragment's existence was exposed, Zero Wing's opponent would no longer be limited to the Holy Race's Sun Dynasty. Instead, it would have to go up against the various human powers operating in the Eternal Realm. While Shifeng was hesitating, Gentle Snow suddenly barged into the tent in a hurry. Guild Leader, I just received an offline message regarding our God's Domain's World Gate. Excitedly, Gentle Snow said, it has finally appeared in the Starlight Realm. TL Notes. 1. Resurrection Camp Registration. I believe 100% of the 20 Eternal Silver fee charged goes to Zero Wing, as the Red Dragon Nation and Azure Fang probably want to save their slots for their own members' allies. Also, judging by the following, even if this was only the fee for one registration, each registration should only allow players to be resurrected one time at the camp. Once players have exhausted their resurrection chance, they'll probably have to pay the fee and register again for subsequent resurrections. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3609, Chapter 683, Returning to God's Domain. Chapter 3609, Chapter 683, Returning to God's Domain. Chapter 683, Returning to God's Domain. Has it appeared already? Shifeng was pleasantly surprised by the news Gentle Snow brought him. Any God's Domain that wished to connect with the greater God's Domain would need to do so through a world gate. However, before a God's Domain was linked with the greater God's Domain, its world gate could not be seen in the greater God's Domain. Only when a God's Domain was close to being fully connected would its world gate appear in the greater God's Domain. Meanwhile, once the world gate revealed itself, it would open at varying times. Depending on the rank of the God's Domain in question, it could take as soon as several days to as late as several months for the world gate to open. In addition, unlike the world gate of miniature worlds, the world gate of a God's Domain did not have any restrictions. As soon as it opened, Tier 6 players could pass through it immediately. There was no gradual process to speak of. The situation would be completely different from the miniature ancient world, where, even now, its world gate only allowed Tier 5 players to pass through. For most players, whether living in the greater God's Domain or the God's Domain that was opening up, the appearance of a world gate could only be considered a pleasant surprise. At best, they would have access to more resources and business opportunities. However, for the current Zero Wing, it was an opportunity to achieve a qualitative transformation. According to the Green God Corporation, our God's Domain's world gate appeared in the Starlight Realm roughly 5 hours ago, and it is situated in the northern wasteland that's close to the ancient River Kingdom, Gentle Snow said. The Green God Corporation also states that the world gate will open in 10 days at the latest and that the powers of 2 realm empires and 6 realm kingdoms have already mobilized their armies to surround the gate. At that time, I'm afraid it is going to be difficult to enter or exit the gate. Aside from the lofty apex and pseudo-apex powers, I doubt anybody can resist the resources and experts of an entire God's Domain, Shifeng said, unsurprised by Gentle Snow's report. I need to make a trip back to our god's domain immediately. I will leave the Feather of Oath with you in the meantime. With it, you should be able to defend the resurrection camp from the holy race's various powers without trouble. But if defeat is inevitable, make sure to retreat without hesitation. No need to make meaningless sacrifices. Normally, it should be impossible for players to cross a world gate before it opens. However, Shifeng was an exception. Previously, he had acquired a grey key in the miniature ancient world that allowed him to freely travel between God's domains. However, there was a precondition for using the grey key. He needed to know the exact location of the god's domain he wished to visit. Originally, he had thought of finding a sealed passage in the miniature ancient world that was connected with his home god's domain. That way, he could use the grey key to travel to the god's domain he had lived in for many years and obtain the Godslayer's legacy. However, his development speed and the opportunities he had encountered far exceeded his imagination. Not only did he get his hands on the primordial abyssal god's legacy, but he had even obtained a primordial chaos body and constructed a superior divine body with it. These opportunities completely eliminated the need for him to acquire the Godslayer's legacy. Hence, he had postponed returning to his home god's domain. But now that the world gate had appeared, it was imperative that he returned before they opened. Zero Wing had annexed many guilds in the miniature ancient world. A few examples were the Star Alliance, 100 Flower Palace, and Mysterious Moon. These first-rate guilds all possessed many Tier 5 and Tier 6 players in their home god's domain. So long as Zero Wing could absorb these experts and bring them to the Eternal Realm, Zero Wing could increase its strength without having to worry about exposing the medium world fragment's existence. Not to mention, these Tier 5 and Tier 6 experts had been operating on their home god's domain for as long as 10 years now. Even a Tier 3 player could reach level 200 when given such a long time, let alone players of higher tiers. Meanwhile, level 200 was a massive turning point in God's domain. The benefits players could receive from reaching level 200 would be no different than achieving a 1-tier promotion. Under the same tier, a level 200 player fully equipped with epic weapons and equipment could match a level 190 player fully equipped with legendary equipment. And if the opponent was a level 180 player, they would be beaten black and blue, even if they had a legendary weapon. If such a group of high-level Tier 6 players were to appear in the current Eternal Realm, it would absolutely tilt the realm's balance. Leave it to us, guild leader. We'll make sure the resurrection camp stands strong before you return, Gentle Snow assured as she accepted the Feather of Oath. Unless the Holy Race attacked the resurrection camp with 2 or more taboo-level experts, 6 level 180 plus, Tier 6 war goddesses should be enough to keep most opponents at bay. Not to mention, she, Hidden Soul, Fire Dance, and Crimson Heart had already exchanged a gold combat technique suited for themselves from the 7 Luminaries Alliance. With the assistance of Eternal God Crystals, they should have no trouble mastering their respective gold combat techniques. Most importantly, Shifeng had already summoned Azure Shadow's group to the resurrection camp a few hours ago. In certain aspects, the defenses of the Soul Lake's resurrection camp were superior to even the 7 Luminaries Alliance's resurrection camps. Alright, I'll leave it to you all. After saying so, Shifeng activated world-breaking teleportation and left the Eternal Realm without hesitation. Starlight Realm, Northern Wasteland. The Northern Wasteland was a level 180 neutral map. Because it lacked high-level resources, apart from when the occasional world boss respawns, it was rare to see players roaming the map. Currently, though, the Northern Wasteland had become very lively due to the appearance of a new world gate here. Many Tier 5 and Tier 6 players at level 180 and above were gathered around the new world gate, and they were all from the various powers based in the neighboring kingdoms and empires. These powers prohibited any independent players from coming close to the world gate, fully intending to be the first ones to harvest the god's domain tied to the world gate. Sure enough, it is the same as before. Shifeng grew a little reminiscent when he saw the 1 million or so players gathered around the world gate. When his home god's domain's world gate opened in his previous life, the various native players thought it would spell a massive fortuitous opportunity for them. However, what ended up welcoming them after they stepped out of the world passage was a siege from the greater god's domain's various powers. Many players died, and even Shifeng had only managed to escape after exhausting his trump cards. After a moment of observation, Shifeng made his way to a deserted canyon nearby and retrieved the grey key, which he hadn't used all this time, from his bag. System: a closed god's domain has been detected. Coordinates confirmed. Do you wish to open a portal and enter the closed god's domain? Open it. Shifeng nodded and chose to open the portal. Immediately, dark grey runes lit up across the grey key. 30 seconds later, a space-time passage opened up. Then, without hesitation, Shifeng stepped into the portal and disappeared from the canyon. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3610, Chapter 684, The Current God's Domain. Chapter 3610, Chapter 684, The Current God's Domain. Chapter 684, The Current God's Domain. Amidst tall mountains covered by thundering skies. I'm finally back. While quietly taking in his surrounding environment, Shifeng couldn't help but find both familiar and foreign. In his previous life, he had spent the majority of his time fighting in this god's domain. He had even formed a guild and made it into the strongest guild in this god's domain. However, none of that had happened in this life, and the god's domain he was currently standing in was very different from the one in his previous life. System: ruined mountain range detected. System: communication with players outside the ruined mountain range has temporarily been disabled. The ruined mountain range? Upon receiving the system notifications, Shifeng couldn't help but look up at the thundering grey skies, feeling a little stressed. The ruined mountain range was labeled as a forbidden land in his home god's domain. It was a place where even Tier 6 players were not free from danger. The ruined mountain range was split into 4 areas: outer, inner, central, and core. The deeper one traveled, the greater the danger one would face. Even in his previous life, Shifeng had never set foot into the ruined mountain range's core area, and he could just barely operate in the central area. Currently, although he was only standing in the ruined mountain range's inner area, there was still a real chance of him dying if he wasn't careful. Immediately, Shifeng searched for a path that led to the outer area and hastily left the inner area. There were 3 major threats in the ruined mountain range. The first major threat was the lightning strikes that grew stronger as one traveled deeper into the mountain range. In the inner area, any random lightning strike could easily kill the average Tier 6 player. If struck by multiple lightning strikes simultaneously, even ancient gods could be killed. This made it so that even Tier 6 players would not dare to fly and could only walk on the ground. The second major threat was the powerful mysterious energy that corrodes players' bodies. Likewise, this energy grew stronger the deeper one traveled. Meanwhile, once a player was fully corroded, they would be forcibly logged out of the game, and their in-game character would die on the spot. The third major threat was the ruined mountain range's monsters. Unlike most monsters in God's domain, the ruined mountain range's monsters could grow as they fought against players. However, their growth wasn't just limited to levels and intelligence. As they fought against players, they would also learn the various techniques and tactics applied by players. On top of that, they also knew how to flee when outmatched. Due to these traits, the ruined mountain range's monsters would continuously grow stronger over time. As a result, when exploring the ruined mountain range, many Tier 5 players would find themselves incapable of soloing even Tier 4 mythic monsters of the same level, while Tier 6 players could just barely suppress a Tier 5 legendary monster by themselves. In Shifeng's previous life, many experts kept exploring the ruined mountain range in large teams, and their actions led to the monsters inside growing to a frightening degree. At that time, if a Tier 6 expert entered the ruined mountain range without a team and encountered a Tier 6 divine monster, their death would be practically guaranteed. Multiple Tier 6 experts needed to move together to stand a chance at surviving. So, one could simply imagine how frightening those monsters were. Although Shifeng didn't know to what extent the various powers experts had trained the ruined mountain range's monsters in this life, based on his experience, those monsters should have already grasped bronze combat techniques and mana techniques at the very least. They should have also grasped many combination techniques. With his current strength, Shifeng was confident he could kill lone divine monsters by himself. However, if he got caught up in a fight against multiple divine monsters or one divine monster and numerous legendary monsters, they could easily occupy him until he died from mysterious energy corrosion. As his primary goal in returning to his home god's domain was to absorb the various first-rate guild's experts into Zero Wing and send them to the Eternal Realm, he naturally couldn't afford to waste time in the Ruined Mountain Range. Ruined Mountain Range, inner area. After sprinting for 3 hours, Shifeng arrived at a canyon shrouded in thorny vines. Then, he entered a cave connecting the Ruined Mountain Range's inner and outer areas. When Shifeng entered the cave and arrived at the cavern inside, he couldn't help but be surprised by the scene he saw. Currently, inside the spacious cave the size of a sports stadium, tens of thousands of players were gathered. The weakest among these players were at level 190, tier 4, while the stronger ones were level 190 plus, tier 5 experts. Most of these players stood in groups of several dozen, while the rest were players hawking wares in the cavern. Selling level 200 epic weapons and equipment for cheap. Whisper me if you're interested. Selling tier 5 random teleportation scrolls. They can save your life at critical moments. Only 3 left. First come, first served. Buying Grandmaster rank food in bulk. Can pay with 7 luminaries crystals. Over 100 players were hawking wares at the cavern's entrance. The cavern looked so lively that Shifeng felt he was standing in a town's marketplace rather than an incredibly dangerous forbidden land. In addition, all of the items being traded here were normally very hard to come by in God's domain. What is going on here? Shifeng couldn't help but doubt his eyes as he looked at the crowded and lively cavern. The Ruined Mountain Range was a forbidden land for humans. Many expert players might come here to explore, but due to the Ruined Mountain Range's hostile environment, players could not truly rest here. Hence, there should not exist any gathering place for players in the Ruined Mountain Range. Instead, teams that explored the Ruined Mountain Range would usually find a safe location to use as a temporary shelter. However, the cavern before him was akin to a market. The liveliness here was comparable to the average NPC town in the outside world. This was a situation he had never heard of in his previous life. While Shifeng was feeling confused, some players started to loudly recruit members for teams in the middle of the cavern. Recruiting 10 level 200 plus, tier 4 experts and above for a direct trip to the central area. We have 3 level 200 plus, tier 5 professional league experts leading the team, recruiting for a temporary team to the central area. We have a tier 6 expert leading, accepting only level 190, tier 4 players and above. Those interested only need to pay 20 units of 7 luminaries crystal per person. We have 35 spots remaining. The dozen or so recruiters were all recruiting for teams headed toward the Ruined Mountain Range central area. Some players were recruiting members to make money, while some were recruiting for capable allies. Their actions made it seem like the Ruined Mountain Range's inner area was a team dungeon. The team with the tier 6 player, in particular, had over 100 players applying to join almost instantly. This scene dumbfounded Shifeng. He never thought the Ruined Mountain Range central area would be so popular, so much so that even tier 4 players would pay 7 luminaries crystals to go there. Amidst Shifeng's daze, a level 194, tier 5 grand wizard wielding a fiery staff suddenly approached him. The other party was a petite girl, and a hint of anxiety and expectation colored her widened eyes as she looked at Shifeng. Big brother, are you looking to escort people? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3611, Chapter 685, Godslayer's Treasury. Chapter 3611, Chapter 685, Godslayer's Treasury. Chapter 685, Godslayer's Treasury. Escort people? A hint of surprise flashed across Shifeng's eyes as he looked at the petite girl before him. He wasn't hiding his basic information right now, so any player could inspect him and learn that he was a sword god. The petite girl similarly did not hide her information. The girl was named Fiery Heart, and she looked no older than 18. Yet, she was already a level 194, Tier 5 Grand Wizard and had multiple pieces of fragmented legendary equipped. The fiery staff she wielded was even a top-tier fragmented legendary weapon. Though, what caught Shifeng's attention the most was Fiery Heart's guild emblem. It was a guild emblem with the image of a dragon and a phoenix, and the guild it belonged to was none other than the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, a super first-rate guild in this god's domain. Normally, guilds of such caliber would have teams accompanying their young experts into dangerous places. They wouldn't let their young talents team up with strangers, much less allow them to visit the ruined mountain range central area. After all, that was a place where even Tier 5 players had less than a 10% chance of surviving. Moreover, should they die in the central area, there was a small chance they could suffer a permanent death. Not to mention, judging by Fiery Heart's age and tier, she was no doubt one of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's core members. There only existed a small number of Tier 6 experts in this god's domain. A superpower would be fortunate to have 4 or 5 Tier 6 experts. So, Tier 5 experts remained the main combat power of the various powers, and the loss of even one Tier 5 expert would be significant. This was something Fiery Heart should understand. Yet, Fiery Heart had not only appeared in the ruined mountain range, but she was even asking Shifeng, a stranger, to escort her to the central area. This situation confused Shifeng greatly. While the monsters in the ruined mountain range central area might have good loot, the dangers that came with exploring the central area simply weren't worth it for Tier 5 experts. Rather than take such a risk, it would be better if Fiery Heart explored the inner and outer areas. If you are willing to escort me and my team, we will compensate you adequately, big brother, Fiery Heart hurriedly said when she saw that Shifeng didn't seem willing to entertain her offer. Our team has 45 members, and we'll pay 25 units of 7 luminaries crystal for each member. Even if some of us accidentally die midway, we will still pay 15 units per person. That is quite a generous offer. Shifeng nodded. Then, out of curiosity, he asked, "But can you tell me why you want to head to the central area, young lady?" 7 luminaries crystals were regarded as a hard currency everywhere. Many transactions involving fragmented legendary items and above were usually conducted using 7 luminaries crystals. It was especially so in this god's domain, where 7 luminaries crystals remained the biggest hurdle for most Tier 5 players in advancing to Tier 6. Meanwhile, Fiery Heart's offer to pay 1,125 units of 7 luminaries crystal just to escort 45 players to the ruined mountain range central area was a lucrative offer even Tier 6 players would find hard to resist. Not to mention, she was even offering to pay 15 units for those who died midway. However, rather than the payment, Shifeng was more interested in finding out why so many players were trying to get to the central area. "Do you not know?" Fiery Heart couldn't help but look at Shifeng in shock. She didn't think there would be someone who still didn't know about the matter regarding the ruined mountain range central area. Don't be surprised. Regarding Fiery Heart's question, Shifeng had long come up with an excuse, so he calmly said, "I fell into a miniature world some time ago, and it took me a while to come back. So that's why you didn't seem interested. For a second there, I thought you only planned to escort friends and allies." Realization dawned on Fiery Heart. Then, she explained, "Well, the matter regarding the central area isn't much of a secret. A few days ago, an ancient ruin called the Ruined Temple appeared in the central area, so many people are going there to explore it, hoping to reap a big harvest." Fiery Heart did not doubt Shifeng's reasoning. After all, many players would abruptly disappear from time to time in God's domain, and most of these disappearances were due to players entering various miniature worlds. It was also very common for players to be trapped in these miniature worlds for months and even years. The Ruined Temple? Shifeng fell into a daze when he heard this name. In his previous life, the Ruined Temple had caused a huge wave in both his home god's domain and the greater god's domain. This was because the Ruined Temple wasn't just your average ancient ruin. Instead, it was a treasury left behind by the God Slayer. To the players of his home god's domain, the God Slayer was inconspicuous. This was because the God Slayer only created a few achievements in this god's domain. The ancient gods slain by the God Slayer were also rather average. However, it was a different story in the greater god's domain. According to the greater god's domain's historical records, The Godslayer was responsible for the death of the last ancient demon god, an existence rivaling primordial god. Meanwhile, it goes without saying that the treasury left behind by such a frightening existence would be a great temptation to the greater god's domain's various powers. However, the timing of the ruined temple's appearance in this timeline was different. In his previous life, the ruined temple only appeared 1 year after the world gate fully opened. Of course, following its appearance, many players flooded the ruined mountain range central area, all of them hoping to obtain the Godslayer's legacy and become an existence capable of rivaling primordial gods. There are many treasures in the ruined temple, Big Brother, Fiery Heart continued when she noticed the look of interest on Shifeng's face. From what I heard, several temporary teams have already found loose pieces of fragmented legendary equipment sets there. With Big Brother's tier, as long as you go there, the various powers' main forces will definitely try to recruit you. Even if you gain nothing from the ruined temple, the pay you can get from those powers should still be worth your time. Alright, I'll take you all there, Shifeng answered after giving the matter some thought. Have your team get ready. We'll set out right away. The ruined temple was an opportunity he could not miss. It was especially so since its exploration reward could only be claimed once. In his previous life, because he was stuck dealing with enemies in the greater god's domain, he never got the opportunity to explore the ruined temple himself. Now that the ruined temple had appeared, he naturally wouldn't miss it. Moreover, going by Fiery Heart's words, this god's domain's various powers had gathered in the ruined mountain range central area because of the ruined temple's appearance. With 100 Flower Palace and the others being first-rate guilds, they had most likely sent their main forces to explore the ancient ruin. This would make it much easier for him to gather them all together. Meanwhile, after hearing Shifeng's reply, Fiery Heart quickly left to inform her resting teammates. Are you sure that Uncle is reliable, Heart? A young man named Crying Blade asked. He was a level 200, tier 5 berserker, and he couldn't help but grow a little worried as he looked at the person Fiery Heart had found to escort them. Setting aside the fact that I've never even heard of him, his level is just 178. At such a low level, I highly doubt he can escort all of us safely to the ruined temple. Why don't we wait a little longer and find a higher-leveled tier 6 expert? The other members of the team nodded in agreement. A player's level was just as important as their tier. The ruined mountain range central area was filled with level 200 monsters. A level 178, tier 6 player would have their strength greatly restricted there. A moment after Crying Blade finished speaking, several players entered the cavern from the outer area. Walking in the lead was a woman with shoulder-length crimson hair, and she was a level 202, tier 6 sword god carrying 2 longswords on her back. Oh my god! Look! It's Crimson Mist, the Eternal Glory Adventurer team's newly promoted sword god. TL notes: 1. Eternal Glory Adventurer team, Phi-E. This is the adventurer team that Ji Luorong, Phoenix Rain's little sister, belongs to in this timeline. 2. However, the timing of the ruined temple's appearance in this timeline was different. In his previous life, the ruined temple only appeared 1 year after the world gate fully opened. Going by these 2 sentences, my theory is that Shifeng's god's domain fully connected with the greater god's domain at the same time as it did in this timeline. In other words, it should have only become fully connected roughly 10-11 years after launch. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3612, Chapter 686, New Generation of Experts. Chapter 3612, Chapter 686, New Generation of Experts. Chapter 686, New Generation of Experts. Following the arrival of Crimson Mist, the level 202, tier 6 sword god, all the players in the cavern inadvertently found themselves turning to look at her. Even Fiery Heart was not an exception. Incredible. Even though she's just standing there, I'm having trouble moving in her presence. As expected of one of the top 5 experts from the most recent S-League. Now that she has advanced to tier 6, she can probably match the various superpowers veteran tier 6 experts already. Match. I heard that Crimson Mist managed to kill a Tier 6 fallen angel with her team just recently for a legendary quest, and she obtained a legendary sword from the quest. In her current state, she can probably even try to fight Tier 6 gods of the same level. When the crowd in the cavern looked at Crimson Mist, all of them, regardless of gender, wore looks of yearning and worship. Tier 6 players were as rare as a phoenix's feather in God's domain. They were so rare that not every first-rate guild would have one. As for the various superpowers, many of them only had one Tier 6 expert. So, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Tier 6 players represented the apex of strength in God's domain. In a situation where veteran Tier 6 experts were operating behind the scenes, Crimson Mist had become a living legend for the general public. The Crimson Sword. Shifeng also turned his sight toward Crimson Mist, and he couldn't help but scrutinize the female swordsman with crimson, shoulder-length hair. Shifeng had heard of Crimson Mist's name in his previous life. It was some time after his home god's domain became fully connected with the greater god's domain, and the owner of this name came from the newest generation of experts of his home god's domain. In that generation, 7 individuals stood out the most, and the public regarded them as the 3 gods and 4 saints. Meanwhile, one of the 3 gods was none other than Crimson Mist, the Crimson Sword. Because Shifeng had been busy evading Demon's Gate's pursuit in his previous life, he had only ever heard of Crimson Mist before. He never met her in person, and the only information he had on her was of her achievements in the greater god's domain. More specifically, Crimson Mist appeared in 10th place on the Starlight Realm's Tier 6 rookie list shortly after she entered the greater god's domain. And if not for the Eternal Glory Adventurer team lacking resources, she could have even squeezed herself into the top 5. While Shifeng was sifting through his memories, Crimson Mist walked to the middle of the cavern and scanned the players around her. Then, she loudly announced, "Eternal Glory is hosting an escort to the ruined temple. We are charging 30 units of 7 luminaries crystal per player. We are accepting only 92 players. Anyone above level 190, Tier 4 can apply." Crimson Mist's voice was indifferent, but it gave off a powerful sense of security. She made it sound like a trip to the ruined mountain range central area was no different than a casual stroll down a street. Meanwhile, as soon as Crimson Mist finished speaking, the crowd in the cavern quickly erupted into commotion. The Crimson Sword is escorting players. As expected of the Crimson Sword, she's starting with a 100-man team right off the bat. The average Tier 6 expert simply can't compete against her. "Goddess, I want to apply." Many experts were overjoyed to hear Crimson Mist offering to escort players to the ruined temple. Many Tier 5 experts also couldn't help but be impressed when they heard her hosting a 100-man team. The situation in the ruined mountain range's inner and central areas was unlike in other maps, where a team's safety would increase with size. On the contrary, the larger a team was, the more danger it would be in. This was because the ruined mountain range's monsters were highly intelligent, and they would never blindly attack any player they encountered. Instead, they would first observe their opponents, and they would only attack if they had a numerical advantage. If they didn't, they would call for reinforcements until they had enough numbers to overwhelm their opponents. Hence, players seeking to travel to the ruined temple would usually only form 50-man teams. This was also the ideal team size that many experts had concluded from their experience. Yet, Crimson Mist had chosen to lead a 100-man team. Unless she was confident in her strength, there was no way she would do such a thing. In no time, many players had gone to apply for Crimson Mist's team. Some level 200+, Tier 5 experts from other teams had even chosen to leave their teams to join Crimson Mist's team. Seeing the crowd around Crimson Mist, Crying Blade from the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion hurriedly said to Fiery Heart, "Heart, let's quickly go and apply as well. There might not be any spots left for us if we don't hurry." The other Dragon Phoenix Pavilion members also looked at Fiery Heart, a hint of urgency in their eyes. Although Crimson Mist charged a higher price for her services than Shifeng, there was no doubt it would be safer if they traveled with her. However, the guild's higher-ups had appointed Fiery Heart as the leader of their team, so she would ultimately decide on which course of action the team would take. This was also why Fiery Heart had taken the initiative to talk to Shifeng. "I know what all of you are thinking, but we've already concluded our negotiations. We cannot go back on our agreement, Fiery Heart sternly said as she glared at her teammates. I disagree. You might be the leader, but that doesn't mean you can act selfishly, Heart, Crying Blade said as he stepped forward. The guild has tasked us to head to the ruined temple as reinforcements, so we must prioritize our safety above all else. That uncle over there might be a tier 6 sword god, but with his low level, how is he any different from us in front of level 200 plus monsters? If you insist on acting selfishly, I'll just pay out of my pocket. The other level 200 plus, tier 5 experts of the team nodded in agreement. Crying Blade. I am the leader of this team. Fiery Heart bellowed. You might be the leader, but don't forget that you're from the Phoenix Pavilion, while I am from the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion. Also, if you weren't from the Phoenix Pavilion, do you think you can get selected as the team leader with your strength? Crying Blade said, sneering. Then, while making his way over to Crimson Mist, he continued, regardless, I am heading over there. Whoever wants to stick with that uncle over there can stay. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was made up of the Phoenix Pavilion and the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion, and the two were in a competitive relationship with each other. If not for the current guild leader being the Phoenix Pavilion's Pavilion Master, Fiery Heart could have never become the leader of the operation this time. Subsequently, over half of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's members left with Crying Blade to join Crimson Mist's team without hesitation. Unfortunately, Fiery Heart could do nothing but watch as this happened. The Heavenly Dragon Pavilion's current Pavilion Master was constantly at loggerheads with the current guild leader. As a result, the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion's members were no longer as accommodating toward the Phoenix Pavilion's members. Not to mention, the command to head to the ruined temple didn't come directly from the guild leader this time. Instead, it came from the guild's executives, and the command was only for them to reach the ruined temple as quickly as possible. Although the guild's executives had appointed Fiery Heart as the team's leader out of respect for the guild leader, she didn't hold absolute authority over the team. Not a single level 200 plus, tier 5 expert stayed. When Fiery Heart saw that only 16 members stayed behind, her complexion turned incredibly ugly. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3613, Chapter 687, This Big Brother is a Little Strong. Chapter 3613, Chapter 687, This Big Brother is a Little Strong. Chapter 687, This Big Brother is a Little Strong. TL notes, Crimson Sword, name, Crimson Mist, name, added, Crimson Sword, title, simply put, Crimson Sword is Crimson Mist's title. Why are there only 17 of you? Where's the rest? Shifeng asked after scanning the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion members behind Fiery Heart. The number of players Fiery Heart had brought with her was completely different from what she told him previously. An accident happened on my side, Big Brother Black Flame, Fiery Heart tentatively said as she looked at Shifeng. But I will still pay the total amount we agreed on. I will also have other players join us to make up for the missing numbers. I believe we can gather a 50-man team in no time. Fiery Heart could tell that Shifeng wanted to head to the ruined temple as quickly as possible. Previously, her team had 45 members, including herself, and she could have easily recruited 4 more players to complete a 50-man team with Shifeng. But now that they were 32 players short, completing the team would take a lot longer. So, she couldn't help but worry that Shifeng would decide to cast them aside and head to the ruined temple alone. That won't be necessary. We can advance quicker with fewer members, Shifeng calmly said to Fiery Heart. Let's set out now. After saying so, Shifeng stepped out of the cavern, his actions causing Fiery Heart and her teammates to grow worried. However, they still hurriedly chased after him. Meanwhile, upon seeing the departure of Shifeng's team, Crying Blade and the rest of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion members couldn't help but be dumbfounded. Is Fiery Heart crazy? Crying Blade couldn't help but doubt his eyes when he saw only Fiery Heart's team leaving with Shifeng. It could be said that a 50-man team was the ideal standard for players looking to travel to the ruined temple. At this size, the team would only need to face monster hordes that were about equal in size. However, if the team was any larger, it would have to fight against monster hordes that were several times larger. And if the team was any smaller, every decently strong monster it encountered would not wait for reinforcements to attack it. This, in turn, would cause the team to face monster attacks far more frequently, severely slowing down their advance. In addition, if the team couldn't eliminate or shake off the monsters they encountered fast enough, they would risk attracting more monsters. Hence, 50-man teams became the ideal standard for players looking to travel to the ruined temple. Even when level 200+, Tier 6 experts were looking to escort a few friends to the ruined temple, they would first recruit more players to form a 50-man team before heading out. But now that Fiery Heart had set out with less than 20 players in the team, even if they ultimately made it to the ruined temple, there shouldn't be more than 2 or 3 survivors. Amidst Crying Blade's surprise, Crimson Mist finished recruiting members for her 100-man team. Everyone set out. When Crimson Mist saw that over half her team was made up of level 200+, Tier 5 players, she issued a command to advance without hesitation. Immediately, the 100-man team charged out of the cavern. Ruined mountain range, inner area. After advancing for about 3,000 yards, Fiery Heart and the others quickly noticed the presence of many monsters in their surroundings. More monsters were also gathering over time, all at level 190 and above. There were also several Tier 5 legendary monsters among them. What's going on with these monsters? Why aren't they attacking us yet? A level 192, Tier 5 cleric asked, frowning as she observed the monsters shadowing them. Their team only had 18 members. Logically, any Tier 5 legendary monster they encountered should attack them without hesitation. This would also be good news for their team as they had a Tier 6 expert leading them. Although they would be attacked more frequently than a 50-man team, they could still reach the ruined temple safely if they took their time eliminating the monsters they encountered. Yet, even though 3 legendary monsters had already discovered them, none attacked them. Instead, these monsters merely stalked them while waiting for reinforcements. If this situation continued, their team would eventually face annihilation. The ruined mountain range's monsters don't have their 5 senses suppressed. Their perception radius is much larger than ours, so they should have detected Crimson Mist's team and are gathering their strength to deal with all of us, Fiery Heart said with an ugly complexion. Right now, our only options are to either pull away from Crimson Mist's team and deal with those monsters or stop immediately and let Crimson Mist's team pass us. However, despite what she said, Fiery Heart felt that both options were terrible for their team. If they chose to pull away from Crimson Mist's team, they would have to face nearly a 50-man team's worth of monsters. To make matters worse, 3 of these monsters were at the legendary rank. It would definitely be a tough battle if they chose to fight these monsters. Yet, if they chose to wait for Crimson Mist's team to pass, although they could shift the monsters' attention to Crimson Mist's team, doing so would increase their exposure to the ruined mountain range's mysterious energy. How could she do this? Did she not notice us leaving? The female cleric said in exasperation. Although never clearly stated, the various teams traveling from the cavern to the ruined temple knew that teams needed to maintain sufficient distance from each other when advancing to the ruined temple. Otherwise, the monsters would regard them as a single team, and both teams would suffer. Since their team was the first to set out, Crimson Mist should have waited at least 10 minutes before setting out with her team, making sure there was sufficient distance between their 2 teams. She should have noticed us leaving, but she probably doesn't care about such matters, Fiery Heart said with a wry smile. Someone capable of leading a 100-man team to the ruined temple naturally wouldn't be worried about going up against a 50-man team's worth of monsters. Even if this number increased several times, it still shouldn't be a big problem. To save time, Crimson Mist naturally wouldn't care about showing common courtesy to a small team like theirs. Should we stop now, Big Brother? Fiery Heart asked Shifeng through the team chat. If we continue advancing, we will have to face more and more monsters later on, ignore them. We will continue advancing, Shifeng calmly replied. Is he not worried in the slightest? Fiery Heart couldn't help but be surprised by Shifeng's indifferent response. She never thought Shifeng would be confident enough to challenge Crimson Mist. Any player capable of reaching Tier 6 wouldn't be a fool. They would know how to accurately gauge their and their opponent's strengths. So, The fact that Shifeng had chosen to continue advancing meant that he was strong enough to deal with their current adversaries. Realizing this, Fiery Heart kept quiet and continued following Shifeng with her team. Meanwhile, over at Crimson Mist's team, under Crimson Mist's careful selection, her team comprised primarily level 200+, Tier 5 experts. As for the rest, although they were under level 200, they were all Tier 5 assassins, Tier 5 rangers, and Tier 5 swordsmen, classes with excellent mobility. In less than 3 minutes, the team arrived within 1,000 yards of Shifeng's team. This was also the limit of players' perception range in the Ruined Mountain range. They haven't stopped. Crimson Mist was slightly surprised when she saw Shifeng's team still advancing steadily in front. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3614, Chapter 688, Difference between Sword Gods. Chapter 3614, Chapter 688, Difference between Sword Gods. Chapter 688, Difference between Sword Gods. Why don't we stop for a moment, Vice Commander? That way, the gathered monsters will most certainly go for that group of people, and we can use the chance to overtake them. A middle-aged man who was a level 203, Tier 5 Guardian Knight from Eternal Glory suggested to Crimson Mist when he noticed that Shifeng's team showed no signs of slowing down. Everything was as Fiery Heart assumed. They had indeed noticed Shifeng's team leaving, but they did not care about dealing with more monsters, so they boldly departed without waiting in the hopes that Shifeng's team would wisely step aside and let them go first. However, it was now obvious that Shifeng's team was not sensible and had no intentions of stepping aside. In that case, all they could do was stop their advance temporarily to have the pursuing monsters start attacking Shifeng's team. Then, they would use the chance to overtake Shifeng's team. No need. They'll stop when the time comes, Crimson Mist indifferently said as she continued advancing in the ruined temple's direction. She didn't even glance at Shifeng's team, showing no interest in them and regarding them as no more than pebbles on the roadside. Understood. The middle-aged Guardian Knight retreated to the side and stopped speaking. Crimson Mist might have chosen the most troublesome method to advance, which would ultimately cause them to be attacked by a portion of the pursuing monsters, but it still wasn't a problem for them. Shifeng's team would be the only ones who would be in trouble. If Shifeng's team still didn't know to repent over their decision, once the monsters amassed enough numbers to start attacking, there was a high chance they would get annihilated. Lunatic. That guy must be a lunatic. Why is he trying to challenge Crimson Mist? Running at the back of Crimson Mist's team, Crying Blade couldn't help but be surprised when he saw that Shifeng was still advancing steadily in front. Ever since Crimson Mist got promoted into a sword god and obtained a legendary weapon, the various powers had already regarded her as one of the 4 great sword gods, and her strength could rival Tier 6 gods of the same level. Even the 5 great super guild's old monsters had nothing but praise for her, and they all felt that current Eternal Glory could already rival the Midnight Tea Party of old. So, it could be seen just how highly the 5 great super guild's old monsters evaluated Crimson Mist. She simply wasn't an existence the average Tier 6 expert could hope to match. Currently, the number of monsters pursuing Shifeng's team had already exceeded 100, and the number of legendary monsters had even reached 6. It should be known that the Ruined Mountain Range's legendary monsters normally required a party of Tier 5 experts to deal with, and even Tier 6 experts could only suppress them in one-on-one situations. When facing 3 or 4 legendary monsters, a Tier 6 expert might not lose, but they would still be kept busy for a long time. Meanwhile, Shifeng's team only had 18 members. With so few members, they were already at risk of annihilation if they were to go up against a monster horde of such size and quality. Yet, Shifeng still insisted on competing against Crimson Mist. He simply had a death wish. As the distance between the two teams continued to shrink, the number of pursuing monsters also increased. 150, 200, 250, 6 legendary monsters, 10 legendary monsters, 15 legendary monsters. When Crimson Mist's team moved within 30 yards of Shifeng's team, the monster count had already exceeded 300, and the number of legendary monsters reached 20. This situation caused every Tier 5 expert present to panic. At this time, even the previously calm Eternal Glory members were wearing heavy expressions. After all, the monsters had already outnumbered them by 3 to 1. There were also 20 level 195 plus legendary monsters. If these legendary monsters attacked together, they could kill even a Tier 6 player of the same level. Damn it! Is that sword god crazy? Is he aiming for mutual destruction? The middle-aged Guardian Knight from Eternal Glory fumed when he saw that Shifeng still had no intentions of stopping. It was understandable for Shifeng to want to compete against Crimson Mist. Even so, there was no need for him to risk his life. In fact, he had even put their lives on the line now. Shortly after the middle-aged Guardian Knight finished cursing, the pursuing monsters suddenly halted their stalking activities and started to attack both Shifeng's and Crimson Mist's teams. These monsters were lizard men wielding skillfully crafted weapons, and they attacked in groups of 3 or 5 using combination techniques. With the help of these combination techniques, even those at the Tier 4 Mythic could exhibit power at the Tier 5 peak standard. Moreover, their attack rate was comparable to that of Tier 5 players. Boom! 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 After the initial clash, the Tier 4 Lizardman slaughterers charging at the forefront had not only broken apart the formations of both teams, but they had also inflicted light injuries to all Tier 5 players present. Everyone, return to formation. Do not let them mess up our coordination, Fiery Heart promptly commanded after the initial clash. Activate the battle array. The middle-aged Guardian Knight from Eternal Glory gnashed his teeth as he commanded Eternal Glory's members to activate their trump card. Then, he continued, all ranged DPS and healers gather together. All melee players form a circle. Do not get caught out alone. Immediately, both teams entered defensive formations in an orderly manner, neither getting distracted by the Lizardman's first wave of attack. Although the ruined mountain range's monsters were highly intelligent, players were similarly intelligent. Not to mention, most players had engaged in group combat since their first day in God's domain, so compared to monsters, players were much more adept at working with each other. Most importantly, players had distinct class specializations. Tank classes were responsible for attracting enemy attacks, DPS classes for dealing damage, and healer classes for providing support. In contrast, monsters had no specializations, and those of the same race generally possessed the same skills and spells. There was no variation to speak of. Due to these points, so long as players kept calm, they could easily stabilize the situation and gradually occupy an advantageous position in group battles against monsters. While the Tier 5 players were engaging the Tier 4 Lizardman slaughterers in battle, the legendary-ranked Lizardman heroes started their attack on Crimson Mist and Shifeng. The Lizardman heroes similarly moved in coordination, the 20 of them splitting into 2 groups of 10 to deal with the 2 Tier 6 players. They intended to distract the human team's 2 strongest combatants to give the other Lizardmen time to kill the other players. Get lost. After looking at the Lizardman heroes targeting her, Crimson Mist unsheathed the 2 long swords she carried on her back and brandished them. Like 2 dragons executing a tail swipe, the 2 weapons instantly sent the 10 Lizardman heroes flying, the sight exciting Crimson Mist's teammates. How strong! I can't believe she neutralized the 10 monsters combination technique and sent them flying, as expected of Crimson Mist. Those legendary monsters are no match for her whatsoever. Crimson Mist's teammates all cast looks of admiration at her. After seeing her attack, they all felt that the battle before them was no longer a problem, and they couldn't help but grow excited. While Crimson Mist's teammates were immersed in excitement, Shifeng stood still and calmly looked at the 10 Lizardman heroes attacking him. Then, just as everyone thought that Shifeng had been scared silly, he took a step forward. Suddenly, a divine might rivaling that of primordial gods spread from Shifeng. Then, the 10 Lizardman heroes suddenly froze mid-air as if they were petrified. A divine domain. Fiery Heart gaped in shock at this scene, and her eyes nearly fell out of their sockets. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3615, Chapter 689, SSS Rank Expert. Chapter 3615, Chapter 689, SSS Rank Expert. Chapter 689, SSS Rank Expert. A divine domain? How is this possible? Crying Blade couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the 10 Lizardman heroes standing frozen around Shifeng. The level 197 Lizardman heroes might only be tier 5 legendary monsters, but each was strong enough to give the average tier 6 expert of the same level a headache. If 10 of them worked together, they could even cause substantial damage to the tier 6 expert in question. Only experts of Crimson Mist's caliber could send 10 Lizardman heroes flying with a single attack. Shifeng was only a level 178 player, so it was evident he had only gotten promoted to tier 6 recently. Yet, he managed to immobilize the 10 Lizardman heroes attacking him simply by unleashing his divine might. This meant that his control over his divine might had already reached a level where he could already form the rumored divine domain. Divine domain. Even among the 5 great superguilds, the ability to form a divine domain was a divine technique that only 2 old monsters had successfully grasped. Meanwhile, so long as these 2 old monsters unleashed their divine domain, they would be invincible to existences below tier 6. Be it monsters or players, everything below tier 6 would be incapable of resisting them. While everyone was dazedly staring at the 10 immobilized Lizardman heroes, Shifeng unsheathed one of the long swords he carried around his waist and brandished it, instantly creating a galaxy of stars across the battlefield. Subsequently, the 10 Lizardman heroes and all other Lizardman monsters within a 1,000-yard radius of Shifeng were sent flying and crashing over 1,000 yards away, and all of them entered a heavily injured state. Is he a monster? The middle-aged Guardian Knight from Eternal Glory gasped at this scene. The act of heavily injuring 300-plus lizard men was simply unbelievable, even if most of them were only mythic monsters. If it was up to Crimson Mist, there was zero chance she could replicate such a feat. This wasn't to say that Crimson Mist didn't have the raw power to heavily injure over 300 mythic-ranked lizard men. Instead, it was because she lacked the ability to manipulate over 300 attacks to accurately circle around the players on the battlefield and strike only the lizard men. If Crimson Mist truly wished to heavily injure all of the lizard men in her vicinity, she would have no choice but to use an indiscriminate AoE attack. Meanwhile, after Shifeng's move, no more lizard men stood in the way of his team. "Let's go," Shifeng said as he looked at Fiery Heart and the other dazed members of his team. Then, he promptly continued on his way toward the ruined temple, showing no intentions whatsoever to stay and fight alongside Crimson Mist's team. Fiery Heart failed to react to Shifeng's words immediately. It wasn't until she closed her mouth with much effort that she had her teammates chase after Shifeng. As for Crimson Mist and her teammates, they simply watched as Shifeng's team left, unable to come up with any words. It wasn't until Shifeng's team had moved 1,000 yards away and the heavily injured lizard men had scattered from the battlefield that everyone snapped out of their daze. How can this be? Regret filled Crying Blade's heart as he watched Fiery Heart's group leave. Originally, Crying Blade thought the quickest and safest way to reach the ruined temple would be to join Crimson Mist's team. However, after seeing Shifeng's display of overwhelming strength, even a fool could tell that the best option to travel to the ruined temple would be to follow Shifeng. Moreover, because he had chosen Crimson Mist's team over Shifeng's team, he must have inadvertently offended Shifeng already. After this, even if he wanted to establish a connection with Shifeng, it would be incredibly difficult to do so. Who do you think that person is, Vice Commander? Not only does he know how to cast a divine domain, but his strength attribute is also through the roof. How have I not heard of him until now? The middle-aged Guardian Knight from Eternal Glory asked, unable to suppress his curiosity. With his capabilities, it should be impossible for him to stay unknown in God's domain. I don't know who he is, either, Crimson Mist said, shaking her head. Then, she continued with certainty, but that person shouldn't have mastered his divine domain yet. He hasn't mastered it. The middle-aged Guardian Knight grew confused. That can't be. None of those Lizardman heroes could move just now. He indeed immobilized those Lizardman heroes just now, but when I checked with my golden eyes, none of them were weakened, Crimson Mist explained. I once met one of those 2 old monsters while out roaming with the commander. When that old monster used his divine domain, all of the legendary monsters within range had their basic attributes weakened by 30%. But that person's divine might did not, so it should be incomplete and can only be considered a pseudo-divine domain. It was as Crimson Mist theorized. In reality, Shifeng did not master the ability to form a divine domain. He had only managed to suppress the Lizardman heroes with his divine might because his concentration had reached the Tier 6 peak standard, and his life rating had improved substantially by virtue of his superior divine body. Even if it's not a complete divine domain, that person should still be strong enough to be regarded as an SSS rank expert, the middle-aged Guardian Knight said as he looked in the direction of Shifeng's departure with expectant eyes. I truly did not think the ruined temple would attract so many SSS rank experts. After the 6th-ranked divine prodigy and the recently promoted martial fanatic, there is this hidden expert now. Things are going to get interesting at the ruined temple. I wonder what rank the commander can achieve now that she has advanced to Tier 6 as well. SSS rank experts were individuals who had successfully placed within the top 5 of an S-League season, and they were all qualified to participate in the 10 Saints League. Meanwhile, it had been a very long time since the ranking of God's Domain's SSS rank experts had changed. But following the ruined temple's appearance, many Tier 6 experts had decided to take action, so conflict between them would be inevitable. Among them, the clash between SSS rank experts was definitely the most anticipated by all players in God's Domain. Alright, that's enough. We should quickly notify the commander about this matter, Crimson Mist said as she rolled her eyes at the middle-aged Guardian Knight. What? Now? Hearing Crimson Mist's intentions, the middle-aged Guardian Knight worriedly said, but if we inform the commander of such a powerful hidden expert now, what if she fails to resist her urges and challenge him right away? Wouldn't we miss the opportunity of a lifetime? Apart from searching the ruined temple for treasures, their goal in exploring the ruined temple this time was to solidify the Eternal Glory Adventurer team's position in God's Domain. After all, 2 of Eternal Glory's members had successfully advanced to Tier 6 recently. The Adventurer team's strength was no longer the same as before. Meanwhile, under normal circumstances, it was almost impossible to see 2 SSS rank experts in the same place, much less see them clashing. Although it still wasn't certain that a clash would occur between SSS rank experts at the ruined temple, their performances there would make it possible for comparisons to be made. This would, in turn, create a good opportunity for Eternal Glory to make a name for itself in God's Domain. We cannot hide this information. After all, there are only a few such experts in God's Domain, and every move they make is of great significance, Crimson Mist said. Then, a hint of expectation appeared in her eyes as she continued, also, between that person and the commander, aren't you curious to find out who is stronger? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know. Report chapter so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,